The Intelligent Money British GT Championship is having fun in the sun this weekend. It is on the Algarve at the Portimao circuit, and qualifying yesterday has given us an interesting grid going into the 3-hour race that we have to come this afternoon, when temperatures are going to be much warmer. It's a less windy day, and it is, as ever, very warm indeed. Here, as we get set for the 15-minute warm-up session, that's the car that's going to start provisionally on pole position, barring anything lurking through this warm-up. The Garage 59 McLaren, Miguel Ramos and Marvin Kirchhoff, the drivers. Miguel replacing Alexander West, that's been in the wheel of that car for the bulk of the British season, and the Portuguese driver getting on the combined times of his time in session 1 and Marvin Kirchhoff's in session 2 onto pole position. Cars at the end of the pit lane, ready to venture out with different teams, of course, doing different things in a warm-up session like this. Some potentially to get the car absolutely right for the race, others to maybe practice pit stops and driver changes, others to scrub in tyres. Ram Racing putting the FP set, free practice set, onto number 15 Mercedes, the car of John Ferguson and Raffaele Marciello. That's got a grid drop, by the way, for behavioural warning points picked up. The stewards particularly keen. One of the big dramas on Saturday morning in free practice was people not slowing down under a red flag, and some very high speeds being recorded. Drivers saying they didn't see the flag, but that didn't really wash with the stewards, so penalties were given accordingly. And the car at the front of the queue is the Mercedes for the 2Cs team, James Cottingham and Johnny Adams, Mercedes AMG GT3. Kevin Say there, who shares with Chris Froggatt. And therefore it is Chris Froggatt, as you can see, who is behind the wheel of the Sky Tempesta Garage 59 run McLaren. James Cottingham and Johnny Adams, the drivers that jointly lead GT3 in the championship. Kevin Say and Chris Froggatt lead the Silver Am part of GT3, and Chris Froggatt behind the wheel, and having a much happier spell with the McLaren than the Mercedes last season. Fast lane is open, and the session will go live in a couple of minutes, with just the GT3 cars being allowed out first. That's the car that's fastest in GT4. Josh Miller and Seb Hopkins doing a great job yesterday, being fastest in each of the 2 sections of GT4 qualifying. And the R Racing run, Aston Martin getting ready for the GT4 cars to be allowed down the pit lane. There's the GT3 big brother, 97, Andrew Howard and Nicky Thiem for this weekend. Nicky replacing Ross Gunn, who's away in America. Also in America, Jules Gounod. So for Ian Loggie's Mercedes, Phil Keane, the man with more British GT wins to his name than anybody else, he's brought into that car. But Nicky Thiem was, as you would expect, spectacular yesterday. Andrew Howard, the man behind the Beach Dean Dairy Ice Cream brand. Aston Martin stalwart, British GT champion. And of course somebody who's raced both in the British Championship, in the World Endurance Championship, in European Le Mans Series. Vastly experienced driver. Came out of mini racing many, many moons ago, but double champion 2013 and 2015. One with Johnny Adam and one on his own, even though he shared with Johnny Adam. Johnny was given penalty points for an infringement at Snetterton, so Andrew won on his own, which possibly rankles a bit with Johnny Adam. Number 14 is the BMW out of the Century Motorsports stable. They've got GT3 and GT4 BMWs. That is the Chris Solkel Michael Johnston car. And next to it was Carl Caver's Lewis Plato's similar GT4 spec M4. For DTO Motorsport, Josh Rowledge and Aston Miller, good to go. It's going to be Aston Miller to go first in the McLaren Artura. That had a few dramas yesterday as well, but ended up going very nicely in qualifying. It was in free practice that the Gremlins reared their head. GT3 cars in a queue then, ready to blast out. And we are about 5 seconds away from the session going live then. There's the green flag. And so the command is given in race control that we can get the cars out on circuit. Sometimes a warm-up session doesn't have that many takers. Sometimes there's absolute maximum commitment from some teams because they need to get out there. Well, the number 24, Andre Borodin, and Ollie Webb McLaren is one I suspect that will need to be out, because that's had lots of repair work yesterday, effectively a chassis change, and then an engine change as well. It started at the back of the GT3 grid. And also number 13 has to go and do some laps. The reason being that the Race Lab car of Ewan Hankey and Lucky Kera has only been driven by Ewan Hankey thus far. Lucky Carer, for personal reasons, hasn't been able to be here up until this morning. It was a very, very early flight, I think, but he arrived in the paddock at about 8 o'clock and has to do the warm-up, and because he didn't qualify the car, it has to start at the back of the GT3 grid. The GT4 field heading out onto the circuit. The Toro Verde Ginettas there, with the Academy Motorsport Mustang number 61 rumbling its way out on track as well. Eric Evans at the wheel of the Academy Motorsport car. So the American driver who's raced in Formula 4 and Ford 2000 in the States before switching to Europe and to GT4 machinery. Another new circuit for him to learn about. He's put himself onto the back of Joe Wheeler and Mike Simpson in the two Ginetta G56s. Mike Simpson, of course, the boss of Ginetta Motorsport, factory driver. He'll be very quick. And number 14 is being given a drive-through penalty. That's the Michael Johnston Century BMW, a GT4 release before invitation. In other words, going too soon. Number 72 Lamborghini here. That's the car that Will Tregurtha is behind the wheel of. He shares it with Mark Sansom. Will Tregurtha, like so many on this grid, one that's come out of the Ginetta Junior Championship, and sadly, much underrated driver. Very, very quick he is. He was Ginetta Junior Champion in 2016. And his main rival that year, Stuart Middleton, is also on the grid in a GT4 car. They drove together a couple of seasons later in the GT4 European Series for Charlie Kemp's HHC team. And there, Will Tregurtha absolutely on the money as he comes down towards turn one, gets up the inside of Chris Froggatt, terrorises the McLaren out of the way. I am coming through, he says. So Will Tregurtha in a big, big hurry. James Cottingham and Ian Loggie are the two in the 2Cs Mercedes. Ian Loggie switching teams for this year. And John Ferguson in number 15, 97, Andrew Howard back in, practice pit stop being undertaken. Come the race, 3 pit stops are mandatory in the 3-hour race. Now, if you think about World Challenge Europe, it's a bit more formulaic. You go for an hour and you stop, you go for an hour, you stop, you go for an hour, you take the checkered flag. But here, there is that 3rd pit stop, so there are 4 stints, not 3. There's got to be a driver change on each stint. So the teams here have a little bit more either strategy to play with or to trip themselves over with. Do you run a long stint, a short stint? Do you rely on a safety car? What do you do with the tyres? Do you run used for your AM or for your Pro? Indeed, what do you do in terms of the amount of fuel that goes in? So there's a lot more, perhaps, that goes into this style of 3-hour race than others. Some teams absolutely love it, others less convinced. But we'll see what pans out. It does mean that it's an interesting race to follow because different teams are doing different things. Lots of sparks flying, suggesting the car is fully fueled for James Cottingham. Coming up towards the timing line now, breaks the beam, and the offering is a 144.5. Yesterday, in the qualifying session, we got them into the 142s for the AMs and a 141 for the Pros. Ian Loggie now goes faster, 144.530, 23 thousandths quicker. Martin Plowman was at the wheel of number 11 McLaren to go 3rd, and Will Tregurtha's Lamborghini now at the top, 143.597. That's Ian Loggie very wide at turn 4. That would be a track limit offence. So that is James Cottingham over the brow. And yes, Ian Loggie has just been warned about track limits. Actually, not at turn 4 as we saw, but turn 1. But the turn 4 warning might come as well. James Cottingham out of turn 8 here. James Kell, number 42 McLaren, currently the fastest. Not that the times matter for the grid, just by way of interest. James Cottingham presses on. I think he would have raced here in historics as well. James, prolific historic race winner before coming into modern day GT cars. Some of his historics are fairly recent as well, like the Dallara LMP1 car that he's raced at Le Mans and taken up the hill at Goodwood, for example. But James now proving to be a very, very quick AM in GT3 terms. The spectacularly coloured DK Engineering Mercedes comes then now into turn 15. DK Engineering made its name looking after Ferraris. But even though there's a Ferrari GT3 option, it's the Mercedes, which is a very user-friendly car that James has gone for. Comes over the line, and that lap slightly slower, only by hundreds, though, as you look at number 13 of Lucky Carer. So Ewan Hankey was behind the wheel of the car for everything he could do yesterday, free practice and his qualifying. Lucky Carer arriving this morning, so he's got to do his 3 laps in the warm-up. He's got to start the race, and it will be from the back of the GT3 grid. Lucky Carer has raced all sorts of desirable things, like Lamborghinis in Brit Car. He's been the Ferrari Challenge champion. He's raced in Carrera Cup, came out of BMW club racing, but has driven a lot of exotic things in a very short space of time. And he's another very handy AM indeed. Bear in mind that, admittedly, with a long safety car period, he and Ewan Hankey got second in the 2-hour race at Donington back at the end of May. Number 18, pit box activity, is under investigation, which is an interesting one. That's the Team Parker Racing squad. So, not a message you see terribly often, but we'll try and get to the bottom of that. Over the line, then, James Kell still the fastest. That is Ian Logie, sharing with Phil Keane, the man with the most GT British Championship wins to his name. Ian Logie, the reigning champion, the car in that retro D2 livery that it ran in the Gulf 12 Hours, and continues in the same vein, reminiscent both of DTM but also late 90s Mercedes FIA GT Championship cars from the GT1, the original GT1 era. Another man being warned about track limits, Chris Froggatt, third offence already at turn 1. And we've only had about 7 minutes of the session, so being a bit wayward there. And of course, in a 3-hour race, the penalties become that little bit more draconian the more you do. 3 gets you a black and white flag, 4th offence is a drive-through, then another driving standards flag, 6th offence a drive-through. So you start to lose more and more time. That is James Kell in the McLaren GT3, with the GT4 McLaren just ahead, the Artura. But this is the car that's currently fastest. James on a 1:42.8. One of the silver AMs as opposed to a Pro-Am car. That's a separate class for silver AMs, and that's the one being led by Kevin Say and Chris Froggatt within the championship. Whereas in GT4, you've got AMs, silvers, and Pro-Ams. And the silvers carry an extra time on the pit stops. They carry a further 14 seconds on each of their pit stops. Now there's also the compensation pit stop times to factor in from the top 3 from Snetterton. So John Ferguson and Raffaele Marciello in GT3 carry 20 seconds. There are 15 given to Johnny Adam and James Cottingham, and 10 seconds for Ian Logie and Phil Keane. In GT4, 20 to the Jack Brown, Charles Clark McLaren, 15 to number 36, the DTO McLaren of Josh Rowledge and Aston Miller, and then 10 to number 23, the pole car of Josh Miller and Seb Hopkins, plus the extra time that you have to serve if you are a silver entry. The silver pit stops in GT4 on every pit stop, which does give the Pro-Ams a real chance here. The compensation pit stops, what used to be known as success penalties, they are to be served only on the last pit stop. So the time you accrued from being in the top 3 at Snetterton, you put on at your last pit stop only. Over the timing line here is the car that's 19th fastest, Freddie Tomlinson. Lawrence Tomlinson's son at the wheel of it, sharing with Stuart Middleton, who I was talking about a little bit earlier. And Freddie Tomlinson, like so many on the GT4 grid, have come out of Ginetta Junior ranks and getting increasingly competitive as Freddie. So the GT4 spec car with the GT3 Aston behind, which is Matt Topham at the wheel of it. The car from SRO Motorsport. They've switched from Morgan Tilbrook to Matt Topham. Morgan a bit too busy with work commitments. They've also switched from the McLaren to the Aston Martin. So all change for Enduro Motorsport. James Kell, who was the fastest, has pitted. Will Tregurtha has given way in 72 now to Mark Sansom. And the session has got just under 5 minutes still to run. Freddie Tomlinson pressing on. Ollie Webb has taken over from Andre Borodin in number 24 McLaren. He's just put the car 5th in this session. 33 cars have ventured out, some only maybe for an exploratory lap, others to go for a time. So as I suggested earlier, different teams doing different things. Matt Topham, who's had good success in GT4 turns with Aston Martins, now trying to replicate that in a GT3 equivalent, moving himself up past Freddie Tomlinson's Ginetta. You can see the difference that the GT3 pace has over GT4. So expect, and I don't mean this rudely at all, lots of lappery over 3 hours, purely because of the differing pace, and just magnify that over 3 hours of racing. The best lap time we got out of a GT3 car was a 1:41, and the best out of a GT4 was a 1:51. So if it's about 10 seconds a lap multiplied by 3 hours, then clearly a lot of lappery will be done. It's a long lap. It's nearly 3 miles in length, the Portimao circuit, the Autodromo Internacional Algarve. And it's going to be a very interesting race indeed, with the heat playing a part as well, tyres and brakes being a factor, and how they divvy up the 3-hour race, with 1 hour and 40 minutes being the maximum that one driver can drive. And it can't all be in one hit, because you've got to change drivers on every pit stop. Miguel Ramos and Marvin Kirko for practice a pit stop, refuelling notionally done. The car has to be empty while it's being refueled. And the pit stop time that the cars will serve: 145 seconds in GT3 and 175 seconds in GT4. If you're under that regulation pit stop time, then the data alerted on the TSL timing screen, that goes to race control. They will address what penalty needs to be given. 27 here, pressing on. This is Rob Bell, McLaren factory driver, and up until a couple of years ago, fastest man up the hill at Goodwood. Marvin Kirchhofer won that shootout award this year, another McLaren factory pedalist. I suppose that's okay, but Rob, who remains McLaren's ultimate USB stick, plug him into a car and he will deliver, and very, very quick. There aren't many things that he's not raced in GT terms over the years. Of course, Blancpain Endurance Series champion for McLaren, going back a good few seasons now, when he and Conrad Edgar and Shane van Gisbergen teamed up to win it. But Rob sharing with Mark Radcliffe, the ex-Porsche racer, drove in Carrera Cup GB and Porsche Super Cup, and getting faster and faster all the time. And Rob certainly rates him as a co-driver, and able to work with him, as a pro does, to get more and more time out of the AM driver. Pit stop for Darren Lung. He gets on board 91 from Dan Harper, the Northern Irishman, the factory driver. And Darren Lung, who came into GT3 with a BMW at the back end of last year and won first time out at Donington, also won the 3-hour race at Silverstone. So you must think pretty easy, this GT3 lot. Might be a bit tougher today, we'll see, as Seb Hopkins turns out of the turn 3, turn 4 right-left sequence. He's got Lucky Carer behind him, the fastest Punjabi, as it says on the rear wing. And Lucky Carer dives through on the inside line. He's not raced here before, but he has tested, so the steward's happy that he's got some mileage before being thrown into the race, and he's got the car up to 16th in the time, so maximising his time behind the wheel. He's done 7 laps, which is more than any other car in this warm-up session, so Lucky Carer doing exactly what's been required of him, and trying to dial himself back in as quickly as he can. And again, you can see the difference between a GT3 and a GT4 pace there, as number 23, Aston, falls away. Seb Hopkins still lapping quickly, but the GT3 car's demonstrably faster. Checkered flag imminent, because we're into the last half a minute of the session now. There is, through on the inside line, Johnny Adam, who's gone out for one push in number 4 and put it fastest, in fact, last time around. So the green and yellow Mercedes, 1:42.750 up to the top of the times. And a spin for John Ferguson in number 15. Gets himself mobile again. That was coming out of turn 1 through turn 2 kink. So John Ferguson has a moment. Winner last time out at Snetterton, when he used all of his Formula Ford racecraft to make that car as wide as it possibly could be, and he held on to win. Number 97 Aston, which has got Nicky Tim at the wheel of it. Oh, now this could be worth watching. He's coming up behind the 76 Mercedes, which had a spin in qualifying, but with an absolute and a personal best, Nicky Tim is on a mission. Pit stop for number 12 now being investigated. That's the Ed McDermott, Michael Broadhurst 1 Motorsport Mercedes out of GT4, the Danny Buxton mentored team, as here Nicky Team aims to be the fastest in the warm-up. Can he do it? He's got to beat a 42.7, breaks the beam and goes fastest, 142.478. Nicky Team goes to the top of the times, thunders past the Tim Creswick and also Darren Lung, Mercedes and BMW respectively as he came up to the line. So Nicky Team it is, fastest. Pit stop for the BMW the Mercedes under investigation, as I mentioned, number 12. That is Johnny Adam, then second fastest, and this lap might end up unravelling because there's a bit of traffic around him. Comes up behind number 17 Mercedes. That's another team switching cars because the Enduro Motorsports squad started the year with a McLaren and have gone the Mercedes route. Harry George and Darren Burke, the two drivers. Darren, again, a very rapid, if underrated, sports car racer. And Harry George has come out of Caterham's, having been in the academy only 2 seasons ago. So Johnny Adam across the line, ends up third. Marvin Kirchhofer going second fastest at the very end, 142.6, a 10th back from Nicky Team. There is Johnny Adam then, heading to the 2C's garage, where there Phil Keane and Ian Loggy stand ready, I think, to do a practice pit stop, the car being refueled, and then the indication given that the drivers can get back on board. Whereas some teams, outgoing driver walks away, other teams it's the outgoing driver that helps strap in the incoming, and that might well be what happens here as Ian Loggy runs around the car, and yes, Phil Keane will help strap him in. Sky Tempesta Racing through Garage 59, also there with the car on the jacks. Chris Froggatt, and they're in the car Kevin Say, the Macanese driver who had that win at Alton Park with Tom Onslow Cole at the back end of 2020. So the McLaren will be one to watch, and over 3 hours, inevitably keeping out of trouble, not accruing penalties, all going to be very, very important indeed to a good result for the teams. So Kevin Say done for this session, walks away. And at the moment, a remarkably empty Garage 59 pit area, but that's going to get busy soon when the cars are brought back. So the drivers for number 11 McLaren, number 12 Mercedes and 14 BMW have to go to scrutineering after the session, as well as the cars. Fastest though, Nicky Team in Andrew Howard's Beach Dean Aston Martin, from Marvin Kirchhofer with the McLaren out of Garage 59, and third Johnny Adams 2C's Mercedes. Fourth the Race Lab McLaren of James Kell. Fifth fastest Rob Bell in another of the GT3 McLarens, the car from the Optimum Motorsports stable. And sixth Will Tregurtha in the Barwell Lamborghini. Mark Smith's car seventh, ahead of Ian Loggy and Phil Keane. Ollie Webb ninth, and then the James Wallace Chris Hart Mercedes that has an awful lot of bad luck rounding out the top 10. Best in GT4, the pole car, Seb Hopkins along with Josh Miller. And second from GT4, Charles Clark and Jack Brown, with Chris Sulkeld and then Michael Tomlinson taking third in class. 33 cars seen in that warm-up session, and a 3-hour race to come later on in the day. Promises to be a very dramatic race indeed. Start time 12:45. There'll be the build-up on the grid before that. And although Aston Martin is fastest now, let's find out how it's going to be come race time. So we'll look forward to your company for 3 hours of drama in the Intelligent Money British GT Championship, starting at about 1:45. For now, though, from Portimao, goodbye.